This meeting is being recorded.
Good evening and welcome to another Northshire Presents virtual event. My name is Dafydd Wood. I'm the events manager at Northshire's Manchester, Vermont location. And we have a special, this is one of our most favorite popular events, which is the Bookseller Bookchat. And so tonight we've got Cassidy Washburn and James Case, both of whom are going to be sharing with myself actually tonight as well, some of our book recommendations for us. So first off, before we get started, there is a link I'm going to put in the chat right now that'll have everybody's books that are being recommended. You can go to that link at any time and find everybody's stuff in the order that we're going to try to be going in. Before let's just get started. James, take it away. Tell us about what you've been reading.
All right. So give me one second. So I'm going to start actually with one. I've got them all here except for one book. So the first one, unfortunately, had sold out, and so I couldn't grab it from the bookstore. But it is called Farmhouse, and it is by Sophie Blackall. It's pretty brand new, and most of the books I'm talking about have come out in the last 6 months or so. So they're all fairly new books. But yeah, the first one is a children's picture book, and it is called Farmhouse by Sophie Blackall. And it is literally a kind of a poetic recounting of the history of a farmhouse. And it just goes through from when it was built to the family that inhabited it, and then it goes through that entire family's life in this really beautiful poem. And so it recounts kind of their passage through time as these kids and this entire family grows up. And then as they get older, and then as they move away, and as some people remain, and then when the last child finally leaves the house, it eventually becomes abandoned and it starts getting run down. And the book actually ends with the author coming upon the house in the countryside when it's empty and there's no one there. And yet she finds all this evidence of who used to live there and the family that used to live there. And then the end result basically is that she recounts it in this book with these scraps and all these beautiful illustrations. But it's a really wonderful kids book. I would highly recommend it. It's the language and the writing is really good. Sophie Blackall has written a few kids books, and they're all excellent, but this I think is my favorite to date. So that is Farmhouse by Sophie Blackall, and it's really good. I'm actually going to go on. I've got a little mix of everything. I'm going to bring up another children's book first before we move on to some adult things. But this one is, this story is not about a kitten. This actually came out on Tuesday. It's by Randall DeSeve and Carson Ellis. And it concerns a kitten, but it isn't directly about it. And it is also actually kind of similar to the Sophie Blackall one. It is written as a poem, a really beautiful poem. And what it is really about actually is kind of the neighborhood coming together. So it's about a kitten that's lost under the car, an abandoned kitten, and this couple comes upon it because their dog starts barking, and then slowly, like, one neighbor chips in, then another neighbor chips in, one goes to get milk, one goes to grab a box, one of them helps to try and get it, coax it out of the car, and you know, after a certain number of pages, there's like 10 plus neighbors there who are trying to help save this kitten. And of course it ends with the kitten being adopted by the family. But more so than that, it's just about neighbors coming together as a community over something. So it's just a really lovely read. It's perfect for kids or grandkids. I think it has a really nice message. And yeah, just also really well written. I think both these kids books just are actually very good poems. I find them pretty meaningful and pretty beautiful. So those are two kids books to start off with. Next, we're going to jump into a book called Land of Women by Maria Sanchez, and this came out in May, I believe. And it is a little bit of a mix of genres. So it's partly a memoir because she recounts all these small episodes of her life growing up in rural Spain, which is really the main focus of the book. And primarily, even within that, it's about women in rural Spain. And it's about her life growing up there and what she thinks of how it's developed and how it's portrayed by the rest of Spanish culture and even a little bit of the world. Though it's much more, generally it's more localized than that. But she does an excellent job of raising problems she sees with how it's portrayed and how people are treated when they're from these rural communities, while at the same time being able to weave in her own personal memories of things she did with her mother or things she did with her father. And she's primarily before this, she's primarily written as a poet, and that also comes across, I think, a bit in the writing because it's very lyrical, and then sometimes it's even repetitive. But it goes in these little waves where she's like, honestly, it's like just expert how she goes between personal memoirs and then weaves back into a larger narrative to make her point. And if anyone's ever been to Spain or interested in Spain, even in general, I would recommend it because it's very evocative of the whole culture and the whole landscape. I've been there twice myself, and so I found it to be very poignant. And she's quite frankly an excellent writer. It is translated, but the translator did a really good job in kind of presenting this book as it is. But yeah, Land of Women by Maria Sanchez, part memoir and part almost just a study of rural Spain and women in rural Spain, but very good. Next up, I've got one that is actually the third in a trilogy, and this is science fiction and fantasy. This is called Nona the Ninth. I don't want to put too many spoilers because I already had some customers who I was chatting out in the register. They were basically like, don't tell me anything. But I will say it's the third of a trilogy. It all takes place in space, but it's kind of a mix of sci-fi and fantasy. And I enjoyed this one quite a bit as well. The first book, which was called Gideon the Ninth, was probably one of my favorites to come out in the last 5 or 6 years. And the second one, Hero the Ninth, for me at least, fell off a little bit, and I got lost somewhat with the storyline. But I do think this third one, which is Nona the Ninth, recaptures some of the magic from the first book. The main character is hilariously innocent, and she's surrounded kind of in this post-apocalyptic world where it's literally falling apart. Like the planet they're on is potentially going to be destroyed, and yet she's worrying mostly about a birthday party. And Tasman Murr, who's a great writer, does an excellent job of kind of dancing a line between these two things, where there's a lot of tension from the overall overarching story, and then kind of this humor as this character is really trying to figure out themselves as well. But yeah, it's an excellent addition to the trilogy. I thought it was really well done. So yeah, another really good book, Nona the Ninth. And if you haven't read any of the trilogy, I would highly, highly, highly recommend Gideon the Ninth. Very different book than this one, but action-packed and a blast. Cool. So the next book I have is called Kick the Latch. And this is by Catherine Scanlon. And this is fiction. It is based off a series of interviews that the author did with a woman who worked at a racetrack in horse racing. But I would not say the book is dependent whatsoever on people being interested in horses or in horse racing. It's just an incredibly well-written novel that really portrays a woman's life more than anything else. It's broken up into small vignettes, so each chapter will only maybe run anywhere from, some of them are actually only a single page, and then they'll run up to 5 or 6 pages for some of her larger sections. But it essentially just follows this woman as she's growing up and she's obsessed with horses, and then finally gets a job at a racetrack and then works there for years until eventually she burns out. And there's so many different emotions, and there's like humor and tragedy and trauma and all sorts of things that happen throughout this woman's life. But Catherine Scanlon does a ridiculously good job at capturing her voice, because she talks about all of these different things in like the same straightforward, no nonsense manner, where she literally is just stating them exactly how they happen and exactly how she felt about them, without there's no fluff or anything like that. And yet, despite that, it almost enhances how powerful everything is, whether that's funny, like some of them I was literally laughed out loud, and there are others where it's just so shocking you almost have to put it down for a moment. And this isn't a book I had I remotely had on my radar. It was just something I randomly picked up. I opened literally to the middle of the book and I read one of the sections and was immediately hooked. It's from New Directions, who, if you don't know, they're a publisher. They do a lot of kind of interesting experimental writing. I wouldn't call this experimental. Maybe the setup a little bit, but it's extremely easy to read. I found it incredibly enjoyable, and yeah, just an excellent book. If you love fiction, I would highly recommend it. Yeah, there's a lot of parallels with real life and just an excellent novel overall. But yeah, highly recommended. And that is Kick the Latch by Catherine Scanlon. The final book I have, which is right here, is another sci-fi fantasy novel, though this one I think blurs the line a bit between just magical realism and sci-fi fantasy. It is not, Nona the Ninth is very much a sci-fi book, in the sense that it's set in space. There's a bunch of, I don't want to say stereotypes, but there's a bunch of normal sci-fi kind of things that she packs in there, where it's very obvious. And this one, which is called Siren Queen, is much more of a novel just about a woman. It takes place in Hollywood, and this young Chinese American basically wants to become a movie star, and she's willing to do essentially anything she can to get there. It begins with her as a child when she's going to the movies and she's watching these stars. And then it slowly evolves as she grows up and gets a chance essentially to start acting. The reason it's kind of fantasy is because the author weaves in just all these strange settings, and even how she talks about people and how things are done. There's a little bit of a sense of people almost either maybe not selling their souls, but trading pieces of them away. And there's also things almost in a mythological sense. There's things out in the night and things that people don't understand, that she'll reference in it, not in a way to describe, why the world is, but almost more as an aside. And really what it does is it just creates this whole atmosphere of I would call it is sort of magic, but I would almost call it folklore. It's like almost a folklore surrounding the movies and surrounding the back lots of Hollywood and these places where all this is getting done. And yet the main arc of the book is really about this woman finding herself and putting herself first and trying to succeed in what she wants to do. And that part of the book is also excellent. And sort of the whole part with the magic and the mythology that the author creates is, at least to me, almost, it's kind of secondary, even though it really does, it basically just ramps up the main story. Another one that I had a hard time putting down, and I just thought it really had very unique in how it was portrayed and how they did everything. But yeah, another excellent book. Yes, that is Siren Queen. So yeah, and that is what I've got for tonight. So I hope you guys all take a look at them, but yeah, some excellent books there.
Thank you so much, James. We really appreciate that. Have a great evening. James is our floor manager at our Northshire's Manchester location, as I sort of mentioned to begin with. Next up, we have Cassidy Washburn. She's from our Saratoga Spring, Northshire's Saratoga Springs location. Cassidy does our web orders over there and is our special school orders, which have just started up. Which are really special and a fun thing that we do. We get to host some, allowing some authors like Catherine Applegate to come and talk to 11 different or 14 different schools at once or something like that. It's really a special thing. Cassidy, tell us a little bit about what you've been reading.
All right, so I have 8 books here, and quite a few of them are perfect for fall and Halloween in particular. There's a lot of good ones here. So the first one that I want to start off with is A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. This book actually started out self-published a couple years ago, and it got so much traction that a major publisher, Hachette, actually, Orbit and Red Hook, picked it up, and it is honestly one of my favorite books of all time. This is a reimagining of Dracula, and it's specifically following Dracula's brides, and it's told through the point of view of one. And it spans the course of many years as Dracula himself is finding each bride and then turning them into the vampires themselves. It's filled with this like dark, seductive prose. The writing is like what really pulled me in. I read it in a day. It's like a really fast paced, not a very long book. I read it in a day. It just really grips you and just pulls you in from the get-go. It does explore some really dark topics. So there are some trigger warnings in this. Specifically, it deals with like the horrors of abusive relationships, both physically and emotionally. And it also is at the same time commenting on the strength it takes to get out of those relationships and how brave each character is to then do anything they can for the ones they love. There is a lot of LGBTQ plus rep in this, specifically amongst the brides themselves. There's some healing energy. The ending is beautiful. And it's about vampires. So if you like vampires, that's a good place to start out with it. So I would highly, highly recommend this one for the fall, October, Halloween season. It just came out this past Tuesday, actually. So definitely pick that up. The next one, we're gonna go a bit creepier, and it is going to be The Witch in the Well by Camilla Bruce. This author also wrote a book called You Let Me In, which is another one of my favorite books. Also very creepy and just makes your skin crawl. But this one is another creepy one that pulls you right in. It follows two former friends who reunite after many years apart. And it also follows a character from centuries ago named Ilsbeth, and she was accused of witchcraft. So when these two main characters kind of come together, they kind of start to argue about who's going to tell the story of this witch and who deserves the right to tell this story when one of the former friends turns up dead. So we're going to follow a couple of different plot points and timelines. One of them is told in the past, and then one of them is also told through newspaper articles. So there's different formats in here of writing, which is also very interesting. This is a mystery thriller with a touch of fantasy. Its atmosphere is like breathtaking, and specifically with the imagery, it really reminded me of The Ring and The Haunting of Bly Manor. There is a well in this, so just seeing that in my head was just horrifying. You are also met with like a lot of unreliable narrators because of the written accounts. So you're also questioning everything that these characters are saying. Who killed this former friend? Was it her best friend? Was it, you know, a supernatural being kind of thing? It's really, really riveting. It's absolutely unputdownable. I also read this one in a day, and this one also came out this past Tuesday. So it's brand new, perfect for your Halloween spooky reading night. So that was The Witch in the Well by Camilla Bruce. And then the next one is also considered horror, but it is a YA novel. It's The Weight of Blood by Tiffany D. Jackson. This one is a book that tackles racism in America by following a biracial teen in a Georgia high school as she gets ready to attend the school's first integrated prom. So this in general was just a wildly impactful novel because it does deal with social injustice and racist bullying in particular. I was getting so mad when I was reading this at the mistreatment of the main character, Madison Washington. I have to say that this is a Carrie retelling, Carrie Stephen King retelling. So you might even know where the ending is going, but it's so satisfying and you're not going to be disappointed in the slightest. I really recommend this one for teen readers or even adults who like to read YA. Especially Stephen King retellings. I think it really does it justice. So there is that touch of fantasy in this one as well, but it really deals with racism and social injustice and things like that in a really, really brilliant way. I love this one. So we're going to switch gears again, and we're going to go with another book that is good for the fall season, but it's a bit more lighthearted. So this one is called The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. This is a fun, flirty rom-com that you are going to want to devour from page one. It follows a woman named Florence Day, who is a romance ghostwriter who, after a breakup, no longer believes in love. So she's really struggling to write the next book that she needs to write. And it also follows her new editor, who is way too handsome for his own good. His name is Benji Andor. So Florence gets some horrible news. Her father has recently passed away. So she goes home to be with her family, as well as trying to finish this book. She needs to also grieve her father. So this is not just about finishing a novel. It's not just about romance. It's also about family and family dynamics. One thing about this is Florence herself can see ghosts, just like her father could. And all of a sudden, one day, Benji shows up on her doorstep and he's a ghost. So you have this like cute little romance with a ghost, which is weird, but it does help to explore grief and family and other topics in really unique ways. So this is like a perfect book if you're looking for a romance with a lot of laughs. I found myself laughing out loud plenty of times during this. And it does have a lot of healing elements, which I think is also perfect for anyone who's lost someone. Really fun, really beautiful, and a great story overall. I really, really enjoyed that one. So it's The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. And then I have a fantasy for you, but this is a very light fantasy. This is A Taste of Gold and Iron by Alexandra Rowland. This is, I say it's like a soft fantasy because the only fantasy element in it is the main character and a few other characters can taste metal and tell how pure it is. So they could taste gold and tell you if it's like real pure gold and whatnot. But other than that, there's not very many fantastical elements in it. This is set in a world that is really reminiscent of the Ottoman Empire. It follows a young man who is very shy. He's the prince of this kingdom. And it also follows his newly appointed bodyguard. And they kind of come together to show and fight for their loyalty to the Sultan, who happens to be the prince's sister. This is very character driven. It has a lot of political intrigue in it, and it does have a romance at the center, and it is a queer romance between the prince and his bodyguard. So it's very, very soft, very cute, very sweet. Swoon worthy at times, not a lot of graphic content at all, but it is very, very cute. And this is a romantic standalone fantasy. So if you are looking for a standalone fantasy, this is the one for you. Not a lot of those exist at this moment. So I would highly recommend this one, especially if you like political intrigue with a touch of fantasy and some romance vibes. So this is A Taste of Gold and Iron by Alexandra Rowland. And then we are going to jump into a historical fantasy called The Witch and the Tsar by, I'm not sure how to pronounce that author's name. I'm not going to try at this moment in time. But this is set during the 1500s in Russia, and it reimagines the tale of Baba Yaga. And it is following the character who would be Baba Yaga. She just goes by Yaga, though, as she is fighting to save her country from the Tsar, Ivan the Terrible, and some more like dangerous gods. This is really, really beautifully written, and it weaves together Russian history with mythology. And it spans many years, kind of starting before Ivan became Ivan the Terrible, and he was merely just a czar who was completely in love with his wife. And then when that wife is murdered, Yaga herself has to save her people from oppression, and while also at the same time learning what her true purpose is as a goddess, a witch, and a woman herself. Very, very stunning. This is a debut novel, so it's a great start to this author's career. And I think it's a great retelling of the Baba Yaga tale, as you've never seen her before. So that was The Witch and the Tsar. And then we have another one of my favorite books of the year. This is also a debut. This is The Final Strife by Sara El Arifi. This is the first book in a fantasy trilogy that draws on African and Arabian mythology. I flew through this. This is a chunky one, and I flew through this within a couple of days. I was completely engrossed in the world, the riveting characters. Everything was super complex, but it just flowed really, really well. The plot devices and action and just the character interactions were just so well put together that you never felt bored when it jumped to the next thing, and that's good for something that's this big. I really didn't want this book to end, but basically it follows three main characters who come to work together to in a resistance basically against an oppressive empire. And when that empire starts to have these trials of combat and skill, this ends up being the perfect opportunity for the main characters to try to shift the power dynamics. This is a book that's filled with blood magic in a really unique way. I'd never seen that use of blood magic before in a fantasy. So that was unique. It has fast-paced action, political intrigue, there is romance, all of it perfectly balanced to create this like wonderful world that I just devoured, and I cannot wait to read the next book, which I think is coming out early next year. I'm very excited about it. It does have LGBTQ plus rep in it, including bisexual characters, a transgender character, and there is a sapphic romance at the center of it. So something for everyone in this book. That was The Final Strife by Sara El Arifi. And then the last one that I have to talk about is a nonfiction one. It's actually a memoir, which many of you have probably already heard of, but it's I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. That's definitely a title that's going to grab your attention for sure. Some of you may know Jeanette McCurdy from iCarly, which was a Nickelodeon show. She played Sam, which was Carly's best friend. And although Sam was this like strong character, you come to realize from reading this that Jeanette was not treated well in Hollywood. And this starts out Jeanette telling her story from very early on when her mother got cancer. And then Jeanette enters into an acting career, kind of pushed there by her mother at like a very, very young age. McCurdy's writing is like very candid. It has a lot of vulnerability, and it does shed light on the very dark side of Hollywood. It discusses not only her unhealthy relationship with acting itself, but also her unhealthy relationship with her mother, hence the title of this book. And then it does deal with her personal struggles as well, such as addiction and various eating disorders, which is all very heartbreaking when you're reading this. And although it is heartbreaking, reading McCurdy's journey to kind of like take back control of her life is just beautiful to witness. And I wouldn't be surprised if this is like the memoir of the year. It was really, really well done. And I did listen to part of it on audiobook, and Jeanette does narrate it herself. And that's really, really well done as well. So that was the last book. That was I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. And I hope you guys check some of these out.
Thanks so much, Cassidy. Really appreciate all that. All right, again, that was Cassidy Washburn from Saratoga. And finally, I've got some books I'd like to recommend. It's been a minute since I've done one of these myself. The first one up is a collection of stories by Jonathan Escoffery. This is a debut collection of stories called If I Survive You. This is I thought it was a really special debut. It's about a Jamaican family that immigrates to the United States to avoid the violence at home. And they enter at the time of 2008 home housing crisis and all kinds of things. It's really, I think, a book for today. I was really blown away. There's some stories in here. They're all these. It's a cycle of stories in which they're all connected. They're all about this family. They're sort of mostly sort of focusing on this one character who's sort of a ne'er-do-well and a screw up. But then we get a nice picture of each sort of core member of the family and a friend who doesn't end well. And there's just some really wonderful storytelling in here, and some really electric language. And there's one story in particular I will never forget. It has a powerful ending that is sort of a resounding sort of symbolic feat that sort of echoes throughout the book. It's gorgeous. If I Survive You, Jonathan Escoffery. I think we're going to hear a lot of great things from this guy. Yeah, it's a really sort of special picture of a family. I'd recommend this for readers of literary fiction, generally people that like sort of a family saga and fiction that's sort of of a contemporary setting, the different worlds connecting. I'm going to skip to nonfiction, and then we'll be skipping back and forth. The next book I'd like to recommend is Diagolevs Empire, How the Ballet Russe Enthralled the World by Rupert Christensen. So I'm a big fan of modernism, high modernism, and of the Ballet Russe and of Serge Diaghilev. And this one I'm particularly excited about because I'm going to be interviewing this author for a virtual event later this month at the end of October. We're going to be hosting Rupert Christensen. He'll also be in conversation, in addition to me, with Lynn Garofalo, who is another famous ballet scholar who did a book about the Ballet Russe, a pioneering study of them 20, 30 years ago. And then she has a new book out likewise called La Nijinská, which we're going to be talking about as well. And that's later in October. That's later this month, a free virtual event to look forward to towards the end of October, the 28th. I think you can find it online at northshire.com. Anyway, this stunning book is a history of the Ballet Russe, and I'd say after reading this, that the Ballet Russe, this Russian ballet of Diaghilev's, was sort of the most important ballet troupe that has ever existed. It's pretty clear. By the end of this book, I mean, Christensen makes the case that it's really Diaghilev, that why little girls in America go to ballet. And that's a surprising kind of thing. And you agree with it by the end of this. Anyway, it's this wonderful history of sort of where ballet was when Diaghilev started. And so Diaghilev himself, he felt like he had no talents, and most of his contemporaries likewise saw that he himself didn't have any talents. He didn't have any money, except his one ability was the ability to get things done somehow on a shoestring budget. Or without a budget, asking other people for money. And he was an impresario. And this is a person who's often sort of forgotten about in the histories of of culture as these figures who might not make any sort of art themselves in one way or another, but sort of are able to make these vast projects happen, these sort of live events. And so the Ballet Russe really sort of did create one of the first events of the 20th century, inspiring, you know, Queen and Freddie Mercury later. So for instance, we hear all about the lives of these characters of Václav Nijinsky, the famous dancer who went mad, playing in the Debussy piece, the Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun, in which is a sexually explicit ballet that shocked early 20th century Paris. And then finally, sort of a crescendo with the Rite of Spring from 1913, which is the huge succès scandale that starts a literal riot in 1913 Paris. Music by Stravinsky, or organized, of course, by Diaghilev, dancing choreographed by Nijinsky, and all of these sort of wonderful costumes about the sacrificial dancing to death of a virgin for the spring to come in sort of prehistoric Russia. And all of the it's a sort of this famous moment in European history and European culture in which people are banging on each other's heads and they're shouting, and it's so loud, it's a literal riot. And then it becomes a huge success later on. One of the great moments. It's crazy to think about people having a riot about ballet. Anyway, it's a fascinating book, a fascinating study of Diaghilev, and then what happens to him. He has a very short life. He dies by the end of the 1920s, but they have a blazing career in Europe from the early 1900s to the 1920s. The Ballet Russe sort of continue on in one form or another for a few more years, a few more decades. Diaghilev also, as Christensen says, is sort of one of the most interesting characters. Sort of one of the best parts of his personality was that he was sort of out and proud gay man, leading an early life, sort of unapologetically. Other than that, he doesn't seem to have been a very nice person. None of the people in here seem to have been very nice. These ballet people are all a little crazy, a little dramatic. It is a world of vast egos, poor tragic Nijinsky, but it touches on all the stuff, Picasso, Satie, all kinds of fascinating things. It's a great book, and a virtual event coming up at the end of October. The next book, I'm going to jump back to fiction now. It is, if anyone read, I highly recommend to everyone that read the 2017, I think, Pulitzer for Fiction, Less, by Andrew Sean Greer. The sequel is out now. Less is Lost, and it's reminiscent of the first one. It's all the same fun kind of world. Our hapless hero is once again forced to accept every opportunity that comes his way. He has not been paying rent on this house that his lover lived in. He thought he left to him. However, he owes like 20 years of back rent on it. So he accepts every, sorry about the dog, every opportunity that comes to him, and he enters onto a sad and, hold on just a second. And it's a series of terrible misunderstandings. He floods a campground. He tries to camouflage himself by looking straight with Oakley sunglasses that wrap around and flip-flops, and he doesn't do a good job of it. Everyone asks him where he's from, wondering if he's European, maybe he's Dutch because of his accent, his gay scent. Anyway, he just sort of goes on this quest. He has to meet his father, who's been missing from his life for decades. There is another author named Arthur Less running around as well that causes problems. There's the return of the prolific sci-fi novelist H.H. Mandern from the first one. If you remember in Less, there is a scene in which, in the first novel Less, there's a scene in which Arthur interviews him and he's got horrible food poisoning or something. And anyway, it's really funny, but now he's better, sort of. Anyway, it's a fun, very fast read. If you read Less, do yourself a favor, Read Less is Lost. Andrew Schoengruer's, it's out. All of these are out. The next book I want to read, jumping back to modernism, to nonfiction, it's a book of art history called Picassos War, How Modern Art Came to America by Hugh Aiken. Not really a book about Picasso, really a dual biography of John Quinn, a New York lawyer from the 19-teens, and Alfred H. Barr, who went on to found MoMA. And it's about the sort of these two men principally, and the various other people in the same time, who sort of transformed New York City from a cultural backwater in 1913, in the year of the Ballet Russe riot, in the year of the Rite of Spring riot, that reacted terribly to the Armory show of that year, made fun of the art in the press, was confused, rejected it wildly, and how they became, the New York becomes within a few years the capital of modern art by the Second World War. Basically from the Armory show that John Quinn helped set up to a 1939 Picasso retrospective that Barr had set up through much. And also one of the things that's great about this book is Picasso must have been an absolute terror to work with. I think it's exhausting listening to how Barr spent so many years trying to make Picasso bring him to the United States to borrow these art paintings, to borrow these paintings and sculptures. Besides these figures, there's also the gallery owners that represented the painters. The other painters, Paul Rosenberg, Kahnweiler, Picasso's dealers, and then the other sort of major modern artists of the time. It's a fascinating book, and it's a great sort of history of the early 20th century too, from just before World War I through World War II, leading up to Guernica with a great condemnation of fascism. And you see Barr he was in Germany as in the early 30s as this is coming about. It's a really great sort of picture of modernism, modern art, not through the art itself so much as the people that made it famous, the people that collected it, the people that supported it, and the people that sort of created a place for it that we have today, and created MoMA and preserved it. The last two books I'd like to talk about are two local authors. The first one is a local poet named Rage Hezekiah. She lives in Bennington. And this is her second collection of poems called Yearn. I have had the pleasure of hosting her a couple of times, likewise for virtual events. I'm sorry about the dog. Hold on. And so anyway, so she is a local poet, and she's really special. I think we're going to hear wonderful things about her. She's very talented. Her poetry, it's got a wonderful language to it. It's frank and open, sexual and explicit, yet also it's this book in particular, this book Yearn, it's about her attempts to or struggles with infertility principally, and to I guess give away the ending that's not in the book even, when I hosted her for a reading from this book, she showed up 6 months pregnant. So it's really special to me too. So it's these wonderful poems about infertility that are really painful and evocative and powerful, but she's happy now and she's great. So anyway, I just would like to share a little bit. We're running low on time, but there's a wonderful poem here called Mercury in Cancer. The woodchuck unearths himself, decimates our heirloom tomatoes. I watch a brandywine plump and ripen. When I beckon my wife to the vine to show her what we've grown together, the creatures gnashed it open, dark pink writhing with earwigs. I'm forever unpregnant. Who could be fertile in this time of loss? I'm made to hate my own wanting. It's really, really good. Love the local poetry. And the final thing is another new book out from a Bennington writer, and he's a dean at Bennington College, and his name is Brian Michael Murphy. And this book with a wonderful cover is called We the Dead: Preserving Data at the End of the World. And so this writer, this writer Murphy is a poet in addition to being a scholar. And this is a fascinating book. I think it's sort of one of the most fascinating books I've read in years and years, sort of about, well, what he calls the data complex. So it sort of changed how I think about the world and how I see things. He talks about that we have bio bodies, our bodies, but then we also have data bodies. So there's all of our data around here. So clearly, you know, with Apple and Google and Facebook and all those things, data is the new product, the new commodity, what capital is. And this is the story of sort of where that comes from. And it comes from around the end of the Civil War, so around when mass industrialization hits the United States. And there's these vast amount of paper that's generated, and it's sort of rotting away at the end of the Civil War. So what are people doing with it, and how are people going to archive it? So it's beginning the study of archives. There's almost, I can say, on just about every page, there's something fascinating in this book, something to learn, you know, from the fact that air conditioning was invented to preserve data, to preserve paper, for archival reasons. There are so it's sort of looking at this world, but then there's all these wonderful stories of interrelated elements too. Like the cold storage. The book opens, he's entering this Iron Mountain, which is this vast hollowed out limestone mountain that was originally a nuclear bunker for nuclear Armageddon. That's now where it preserves all of our data. It's where all the servers are. It's where photographs are frozen in deep freeze. And so these places, which created these sort of time capsules, this sort of time capsule fetishization Murphy talks about, sort of starts off with this sort of strange sort of world of white power in which they're preserving the sort of the symbols of a race. And so it starts off this way. And he looks at these people that are sort of the world of tomorrow, and then it sort of bleeds into sort of post World War II nuclear paranoia. It's just, again, I can't talk more highly about this book. There's something fascinating everywhere. Books that are irradiated because of the concerns of the diseases from, you know, the lower class people checking them out from the library, or books that have bookworms in them, and they're a gas, and they're using Zyklon B, the concentration camp gas, to gas these books. And so anyway, it sort of takes us through digital preservation of digital data. And then it you know, so for instance, something that's just super fascinating is we can't make the digital hard drives any more complex, because we've broken them down basically as far as we can on an atomic level. Now the data it's ones and zeros. It's like a off and on, positive, negative. It's a magnetized thing in a hard drive, and so we've created it so it's so small that it's like molecularly stuff that's like Einsteinian, like quantum physics, that kind of stops being the right positive or negative. So we can't do that anymore. But then they invent ways to preserve data, because that stuff is obviously digital data. We've always lost files. It's not a great way. It's what we all use. So what are people doing? They're writing files on stone. That didn't last very long. They're using DNA as a way to write files. So there's these things that are going to last forever or get really small. But the question always remains, how are we going to read data in 10,000 years on this computer? What computer is going to, anyway, it's just a fantastic book that really, I think, is going to be an important study. Everyone, thank you so much. It has been my pleasure this evening to recommend some books to y'all. That's We the Dead by Brian Michael Murphy, Bennington, the dean of the College of Bennington College. Thanks everyone so much for joining us tonight. We'll see you at another Northshire Presents event soon. We'll have some more of these bookseller book chats and publisher sales reps picks as we make the march up towards the holidays. So see everyone soon, and thanks so much for tuning in. Again, you can find all the books at the link I'll put in the chat. One more time, you can find it right there. And take care, everyone. Good evening.